Christian parenting. So, you're having a baby. Congratulations. Guys, way to go. You nailed it. But now that you're having a baby, or maybe little one is already here, where do we go from here?
I remember the day that Rachel and I found out that we were having a baby. In a matter of seconds, I went from elation to terror. I always dreamed of having kids, and I knew Rachel would be an amazing mom. But all of a sudden, it's like a 9-month timer went off in my head, and I couldn't stop wondering how we'd ever be ready for the day that would change everything. I read book after book, article after article, and somehow none of it was enough. And honestly, conversations with friends, family, and even random strangers just seemed to make it worse. Everyone just wants to say how hard it is.
And it is hard, but it's also beautiful, wonderful, and the best thing ever.
Absolutely. And that's why we're so excited today to start this podcast and to talk about how to go from getting by to thriving with a newborn.
Parenting with a newborn is real hard, but we're here to help.
So welcome to episode 1 of So You're Having a Baby. Let's dive in. Well, Rachel, here we are, episode 1.
I always get so nervous. So yeah, y'all should just know that ahead of time. But I'm very excited to be doing this with you.
Disclaimer, I'm learning now every episode we'll have to record for the podcast will require 15 minutes of space just for laughter at the beginning of our recording session.
I get the giggles and I can't stop.
And then I get the giggles because you get the giggles and I can't stop. Mm-hmm. And then there's tears in my eyes and I can't see. Yeah. And it's all good fun.
Sorry.
It's all good fun. We'll take it. So Rachel, why don't you tell the good people listening what we're doing today on this inaugural episode of So You're Having a Baby?
Well, we're going to kick off the podcast by talking about just how crazy being pregnant is. If you're listening and you are or have been pregnant, you know it's totally insane. Having a baby in your stomach is crazy. What's even crazier is all the people around you when you're pregnant.
Rachel, you have to tell the good people one of your craziest pregnant stories of all time. And I think you know the one I'm talking about.
Okay, so there is this choice word. I'll just use the word precious. Precious woman. I was pregnant with Wells, which is our second. And, you know, it's true. Everybody says it, but it's true. You're bigger the second baby. Blah, 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 whatever. Your body's already stretched out. You know, it's already done the thing. And, you know, I think I was like 8.5 months pregnant because it was like December and Wells was born in December. So yeah, I'm big. You get it. And we're going to buy a new couch and we're like just couch shopping at Macy's. And, you know, the saleswoman who's getting commission off of our sale is like, oh, wow, you're so pregnant. And I'm like, yeah, I am. She's like, are you having twins? No. Are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. I'm not. What are you? She's like, well, you're just the size of my niece who's having twins.
Unbelievable.
To where I'm like, okay, lady, do you know anything about pregnancy or children? Have you ever been pregnant? Because your niece could be pregnant with twins and be 20 weeks and I could be 40 weeks with one and it would be the same size. Anyways, people are insane.
People are completely insane. And as a teaser, episode 2, we're going to share more unbelievable stories that probably will resonate with all of you about how insane other people are. Because they're absolutely insane. I've never experienced anything like it.
It's like their filter just is gone, literally. And they say whatever comes into their brain, it just like word vomits on you.
It's completely nuts. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. If you're out there and you have people saying crazy things, you're not alone.
You're not alone.
And episode 2 will make sure that you know that you're not alone.
Crazy, insulting things.
Seriously.
It's amazing.
If you're the Macy's lady and you're listening, get your stuff together.
Yeah.
And learn how to be a good salesperson and a good human being.
Yeah. So Craig, what was pregnancy like for you? Because obviously it was way crazier for me both times. I mean, I was growing a baby for God's sake, but I guess it was a little crazy for you too.
I'll admit it's a little bit tougher for you, for the female and being pregnant. But for me, it was absolutely crazy as well. I mean, I remember having this feeling like all of a sudden, like I have to get all of my stuff together, especially we found out we were having Wes the first time around, so a boy, second time around Wells as well. But especially with Wes, when we found out we were pregnant with our first, I was like, this kid's going to be a man. He's a boy. and he's going to look to me as to what it looks like to actually be a man. And I was terrified. So I started working out and running. I started trying to get all our finances together. I'm not normally a financial management person.
Not even close.
Do not like looking at our budget, self-disclosure. But I started trying to get all my stuff together. And I remember I was like stressing myself out so hard for months and months up until this boy got here, not knowing how to prepare. It's just crazy trying to feel like, how do we get ready for this date that's coming? And there's this timer that goes off in your head, like this day is coming. They give you a due date. You don't know if it'll be the actual due date that you have the kid, but there will be a due date. This kid will arrive, and you just keep trying to prep for it, and it's coming, and it's this inevitable moment. And I guess that's kind of what we want to talk about today. It's this process of getting ready for a baby is kind of exhausting. And whether you're listening to this and you're having a kid for the first time, or maybe your family is just expanding, it's really scary. I mean, pregnancy and labor and birth, getting home from the hospital and trying to figure out how to get this baby to sleep so you can sleep, and nursing and bottle feeding and in-laws, trying to have some semblance of normal life and work with having a baby. As we both worked having kids. And as a Christian parent, there's kind of this added layer too. There's this sense that this is God's child that he's given you to steward. So how do you love and care for it the way that God would? How do you raise this little baby to know and love God? And what do I do about the fact that this kid is going to see me at my worst sometimes and have to overcome my own weaknesses?
Yeah. It's amazing. Like, nothing has stretched me and refined me and sanctified me like becoming a mom and mothering these two boys. Newborn phase, pregnancy, all of it. But that's just the beginning of it, And I remember early on, I would say I probably had some baby blues for sure. And we're going to get into that in this season as well. Down the road, just postpartum depression and baby blues and dealing with all the ups and downs hormonally that you go through after birth and even in pregnancy. But I was feeling really, really down one day. And a friend of mine who had just had a baby as well sent me this verse from Isaiah 40, verse 11. It says, "He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young." That just really stood out to me, this idea that God would gently lead me, that I'm this new mom. I'm like this sheep that has this little baby sheep, and that God is my shepherd and sees me in that way and is going to hold me close to his chest, carry me along, and gently lead me through this postpartum season, which is so deeply encouraging to me, because it's definitely my bend to be a perfectionist and to kind of grin and bear it when it comes to recovery, when it comes to nursing, when it comes to doing hard things. I'm like, well, just muscle up and just get through it. But that's just not the reality of walking with God. Like, he's here to hold our hand and like walk through this very challenging season alongside us and strengthen us and hold us up. So there's this amazing opportunity for young parents to experience God's gentle leading in this new season with newborns.
Yeah, that's so good. And I want you to know, listening to this, that's Rachel and my heart as well. Our desire is to try to do these conversations gently. We know that it's a really tough time. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of content out there that's intended to be encouraging, maybe, but comes off a little bit dominating in its language, and like, this is what exactly how you need to reach your kids. This is what it means to do nursing is this, and sleep training is this, and all this stuff. And reality is that we have to raise our kids personally as well. We have to decide what's right for us, what's right for our families, how are we wired, what has God called us to do specifically. And so our goal with this, and even in writing our workbook, A Parent's Guide to a New Baby, was to try to make space for you to personalize what it means to have this new baby and start a family. So we're going to try to venture into this content as gently as we can, and so excited that we're launching as a companion to our workbook, A Parent's Guide to a New Baby, this podcast, because we know that having a baby is both really hard and really amazing. And we wish something like this existed, to have someone to empathize with, to have someone to help answer the tough questions, and to really just serve as a guide to help us begin and expand our family as best as we can. So in future episodes, we're going to cover some really specific unpack topics, those tough topics in depth. But for today, before we get too specific, our goal is really just to lay a solid foundation by talking about what we see, Rachel and me, as the 4 pillars of a thriving experience as Christian parents with a newborn. So let's jump into what those 4 pillars are. So excited that you're joined us. So excited that you're listening. So excited to cover some of the content that we created in our workbook with you today inside of this podcast. So in our workbook, A Parent's Guide to New Baby, we start off with this really important topic, I think, on suffering and self-care, and this tension that exists between these 2 really important needs. That having a baby is hard, and there's this stretching that happens and some suffering that comes with that, especially in comparison to what life is like before having a baby. But it doesn't mean that self-care goes out the window. It's a really critical part of being able to care for your baby is caring for yourself. And so in the workbook, what that looks like is diving into topics like sleep and marriage and the stretching process that happens in that, and the family dynamics that are involved in that, even quiet time and getting some time alone with God. And just in the workbook as well, there's content and quotes and questions and guided prayer. But what we want to do today in the podcast is just kind of overview this subject a little bit for you that are listening, to have this idea of what we mean by suffering and self-care, and just to get your mind going and maybe even help start a conversation with your spouse around what are we going to do to prepare for this tension we need to live in between suffering and self-care. Rachel, what comes to mind for you? What did that look like in your experience of when we first had Wes and we were right in that newborn season?
Well, I think in the Christian community, there is a common misconception that self-care is selfish
That's good.
and like not godly and not of God, and that suffering is the way almost like, when we say suffering, we mean like laying down this idea of almost like laying down your life. Like you're going to go through really hard things, but they're really good things and they're for a really good reason. And so how do you suffer well? So how do you recover from a 4th degree tear really well, or a C-section, or whatever, or the nursing pains, or what if you couldn't produce milk and you're going through all the disappointment that comes with that? You know, you're not sleeping. Honestly, you feel like you're being tortured. Like sleep deprivation is a form of torture for a reason. Like there were days after having Wells, because Wells was our really bad sleeper, that I literally like couldn't function, you guys. And so there's like this balance between like, oh, I need to like suffer and lay down my life for this baby and all of those things. And we often like lose this self-care element, and like we lose doing it well. Like I can't tell you how many times me and my mom friends would joke about the last time we showered, which is like not okay. Like I understand like it's hard to find time to shower, but like mom, you should be able to shower just as much as you want to. It may not be like during the day if like you're on maternity leave and your husband is off at work, like you may not be able to shower until he gets home. But it's this idea of like making time for yourself, making sure that you get what you need. Because if you're not being taken care of, you're really not going to be able to take care of that baby for long. Like you're gonna burn out, you're gonna explode, you're gonna lose it. That's just like a form of being human and having limits. And so going into the newborn season, understanding I'm human, I have limits, I need things too. This baby is not the only person that needs something, and same with your husband or your wife if you're the dude. Just being able to say, hey babe, I really need to take a shower. I really need, hey, just some alone time to put my feet up and maybe like read a book or take a nap or whatever it may be. Like I need time with my friends. I really, really, really need like some time with one of my girlfriends to go get coffee. Like, can we find a way for you to watch the baby? Whatever it looks like for you. Like I just got so swallowed up in Wesley when I first had him, our firstborn, so swallowed up in recovering from a horrible, horrible birth and all that came along with that. You know, I was just swallowed up by it and I didn't take good care of myself. And we really want to help you guys avoid that kind of suffering and balance it with some really practical, good self-care.
Yeah, that's so good. I remember, and this is why I think this is an important first pillar in this idea of having a thriving experience as Christian parents with the newborn, because there's this reality that you really cannot care for this little one if you're not caring for yourself. And it might not look like it did before. You might not be able to care for yourself in all the ways that you're used to. That might be less, frankly, than you're used to, but it doesn't mean that you don't care for yourself at all. And there's this amazing ability for this little human being to become almost like a new center of gravity in your household. And everyone seems to orbit around this new center of gravity. It's like grandparents come in and the first thing they do is this little baby. And if the baby cries, everyone stops and tries to fix it. If the baby's hungry, if the baby needs sleep, it's like everything the baby needs is the center of gravity. And I think it's really easy for little babies to kind of pull everything that you have to give and more. And I remember one of my mentors told me one time that the two most important lessons to teach your children is that they are loved unconditionally and that they are not the center of the universe. And those two things sound very different, right? Like there's even this sense now that our kids are a little bit older. As we record this episode, our oldest is about to turn 4 years old. And I think there's this sense whenever I convey that he's not the center of the universe, that he doesn't feel loved by me, right? It's not what he loves or what he wants, but that is a loving lesson to teach him. And I think that can even start when they're a baby, that sometimes it's okay if the baby cries, if it doesn't get food right when it needs it, if it's off a schedule, because you're caring for yourself and you know that you need something in order to even better care for your baby. So Rachel, let's get practical for a second as we wrap up talking about this first pillar of suffering and self-care. What practical examples come to mind for you of what it looks like to practice self-care as a new mom?
Yeah, so lots of different examples. So hygiene is a really big deal. Just taking care of your body is just really important. And I think we underestimate, ahead of time what it's going to really be like. But man, when you're recovering from childbirth and if you're going to nurse, going through the whole nursing thing, I spent so many days covered in like spilt milk or like had breast milk stains on my shirt and like wouldn't change because I was so exhausted. So things like that, like setting up daily rhythms for yourself. Like I'm going to get up, Craig's going to watch the baby, I'm going to take a shower and I'm going to take my time and relax in the shower and do the whole thing, shave my legs if I want to do something special for myself, and then put on clean clothes, make myself a cup of coffee. And just, I think even something like that, like this is how I'm going to start my day. And we make time and space for each other to be able to do that is really important. I think exercise, like once you're able to go on walks daily and get some time in the sunshine, like, man, that was important for me. I would just feel like the fog of postpartum. And then there were days, I had Wes in the summer, so it's super hot, but there were days that I was just like, I just need to go sit outside in the sun and let the sun touch my face, like to remind myself that I'm human and be grounded with the earth, to even just be like, yes, nature is a tangible reality. Like, you just get swept up in this baby vortex, and that's all that is reality and all that exists. But, just going outside, going on a walk, even just sitting out on the porch, making a nice drink and just taking your time and rocking the baby. And so just finding ways to like build self-care into being a parent, into this new rhythm is really important. Getting time with your friends. If you have other mom friends, having them over for coffee, for like baby play dates where they just lay on the floor and wiggle and you drink coffee together and laugh and tell horrible stories about what you're going through. Like those were the things I would say in the very beginning that really changed things for me, really would lift the fog, would change my scenery, would change my attitude and my atmosphere. And a huge part of that is accepting help. I do want to make sure I touch on that. Like there's going to be so many people that want to bring you dinner, that want to take care of the baby. Oh, can I hold the baby while you get a shower? And it's like weird and you don't really want to be around people. And that is fine. But as soon as you do feel like, okay, I could handle that, take people up on their offers. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but that is a huge way to care for yourself, is to let other people care for you. So Craig, what does that look like for you as a dad?
Man, I just want to reiterate some of the things that you said, especially as we're going to talk about the dad. It's really important, I think, we'll talk about this in a minute, but for couples to support each other in self-care. and notice when suffering is getting to that level that someone, we need to step in for one another, even if you feel like you're having less capacity for self-care than you're used to. Kind of measure each other's level of self-care and suffering. And I think if one person's creeping into that area where they really need help, being willing to lay down things that you need and step in the gap for your spouse is critically important and helpful. So reiterate some of those things about that you said for the mom. And I think it's a lot more often, I think the mom struggles for self-care. I think that was some of our experience with me going back to work and all these other things. A lot of expectation, I think, typically goes on the mom. And so I want to say that for the dads out there, seek to be as much of a support as possible and look for what your spouse needs and step in the gap as much as you can. But
if she needs a shower, you better tell her.
Yeah. Be willing to even voice those things as kindly as possible and in a way that's like, let me help you do that.
Yeah. For example, hey babe, why don't you go get a hot shower and let me hold the baby while you relax?
Huge.
Wink, wink.
Huge. That will go a mile. That's an incredible gift that Rachel just gave you, men and dads. So, but for yourself, if you are a working dad, like I am and was in the newborn stage, going back to work is tough. And I felt constantly, for me, suffering and self-care looks like this tension between having all of these things pulling on me. So I have this baby pulling on me and I see Rachel having such a need. I need things just in of myself. And then work is this expectation that, even if you have a newborn, people might offer you a little bit of grace, but you still need to get your stuff done. And man, you're sleeping way less often. And there's all these other things you're thinking about that can almost be all consuming. And so trying to perform at work was really tough, to be honest. And so that balance of trying to figure out where to invest myself with all these things, feeling like they're already pulling more than I have to give, was a really tough process. And so I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is as men, I don't often feel prompting to be vulnerable and to share with Rachel or my friends how hard that is, or my coworkers even. But I think there's a value there to just be willing to say, like, this is really tough and this is what I'm feeling and I'm not sure how to do this well. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help at work. Okay to ask for help at home. If you need some time just to be a normal guy and to do some things, I think it's okay to ask for some time for that too. I feel like I let a lot of friendships go in those months, and there's not as much time as there was before to do some of the things I love to do with my friends, but still I think friendships are really critical and important, and we need that as guys. And so this balance of being willing to find those things, I would say, that are specifically important for you. What are those things that give you the best bang for your buck when it comes for self-care? And try to create some rhythms and some space around those things that matter for you. For me, that was some alone time to read in this little back office that we have. I love playing golf. And so now that looks like me getting some space to get to the driving range first thing in the morning. My local driving range opens up around 7 o'clock and I'm home about 8:30, 8:45, right when the kids are getting up right now typically. And that's something that we're making space for as a family. And that goes a long way for me personally. So I would say to the dad, find those things that are really impactful for you in the self-care area and try to prioritize those even as you're in those first few months of having a newborn.
Yeah. And I just want to add, men, do not be afraid to open up to your wives about what you need. Like, I know that it's a hard season where it feels like all the attention is on the baby and on the mother. I think that wives too, we need to be open to our husband asking for something that he needs. I feel like 4 years ago when I first had Wes, if Craig would have asked me like, hey babe, do you care if I go do this? I would have probably lost it on him because I just didn't understand what he was going through too. And we both just didn't have capacity and we both weren't looking out for each other. We just didn't know. It wasn't malicious. It was just that we didn't know. And I think that I thought, well, if I'm suffering and I'm going through something hard and I had a hard day, that means that Craig didn't. My day, no matter what, is always going to be harder than Craig's day was. Or, I always need more than he needs because I'm giving more, whatever that means. I think it's really going to be really important to go into this with the mindset of like, hey, we're both doing our best and we both have needs. Like that doesn't change just because we had a baby. And so just to the moms, to stay open to being for your husband and what he needs. And then for the dads, don't grin and bear it. Don't be afraid to ask for help or like for some time.
That's so good. I'll offer this as a disclaimer as we wrap this one up and head to the next pillar. Rachel and I are not, your typical, the man in the house has to look like this, the woman has to look like this, the man has to work, the woman has to stay home. Know that we are not that way at all. In fact, we should probably just do an episode on gender roles. That's in our workbook and is something that we're really passionate about. So take everything that we're saying and personalize it for yourself, for your situation, for what you need to do. If you're both working, if one of you is working, whoever's working, however you're providing. Self-care and suffering might look different for each of you than what be normative or typical in, a Christian family household or whatever. And that's great. We celebrate that. I want to say to you, if you're in that space that requires maybe a little bit more intentionality around how you voice things, but also if you do look like more like maybe a normative Christian family, if such a thing exists, there's also some work you need to do there because those expectations might not be serving you as a family. So hopefully we can dive into that some. Quick disclaimer for you: personalize this idea of suffering and self-care to you as a person, to you as a couple, to you as your family. But whatever you do, we're voicing this pillar first because we think it's the foundation of having a thriving experience as Christian parents with a newborn, that you're balancing well as possible the tension between suffering and self-care.
So the next pillar we want to talk about is embracing imperfection. This is probably the most important one for me personally as a habitual perfectionist and working through it extensively in therapy, believe me. And it's just something that I have come up against constantly in parenting. It is something I've come up against constantly in being a mom, and being pregnant, and being a mother to a newborn baby, and being a mom to a normal chunky 5-month-old baby, to a 1-year-old. It's just literally constant. And as your child grows, it's like they challenge you and kind of rub up against this perfectionism in new ways constantly because they change so much. So right when you finally think you've figured your baby out and you've nailed it as a mom, they change. And it's like, now it's like this new thing I have to figure out and get better at. And so it's just this reality that we all live with as moms, that these babies, these people that God is entrusting to us are so important. And I know Craig feels the same way. Like there's literally nothing that God has asked us to do that's more important than bring another human being into the world. And so with that importance comes a lot of pressure. And if you're anything like me, it's like this pressure to perform and do it perfect and get it right and make this perfect little child. And that's just wrong. It's just not going to work. And so, as you stumble through parenting and realize, wow, I am really not a perfect mom or dad, and this child is not perfect, like you just begin to grapple with all of that. I think it's important going into it to learn to embrace imperfection. This is not going to go perfect. This child is going to spit up on me. This child will probably have reflux or a blowout in their diaper 10 seconds before you're walking out the door to go to their 2-week appointment. Like things just aren't going to go smooth. And so if you're going into it with the expectation that it's just going to be smooth sailing, it's just probably time to adjust your expectations a little bit. So Craig, what are your thoughts on embracing imperfection?
Man, what comes to mind for me first is that I think the world we live in right now doesn't help us in this area. Like especially social media doesn't help us. We see these videos of families that live on the beach somewhere tropical and live this like perfect life as if they don't have to work, and they're all, their hair is like blonde from the sun and they're incredibly tan and fit, and they have kids running around on the beach. And we see even our friends post these pictures and their little newborn is sleeping or is, smiling and laughing or is eating and doing all these things. And for us, like we love social media. Rachel's great at posting great content on social media and love sharing our journey with our friends and with our family. But it's comes up for me is so many times that we posted some really cute photo of one of our kids that 5 minutes before or 5 minutes after, the whole thing is just a mess.
Yeah.
And so the world we're living in tells us that you can be perfect with kids and you can have a perfect life as a newborn because people don't post many of their imperfect moments on social media. Maybe that's something we should embrace as a society, but until we ever get to the day, or if we ever get to that day, I think it's important to know, like Rachel's saying, that this will not look perfect. And what comes to mind for me is that my life went from kind of as a sound wave. There's like these ups and these downs, this wave that moves, where in my normal life before we had kids, the highs were high and I would stay there a little bit longer, and slowly, I get to a kind of like a hard moment or season and I'd be there a little longer. And as soon as a kid came, that sped up so much. So I remember within 30 minutes having this feeling, life cannot get any better than this. Like holding this little baby, and Rachel's right next to me and it's sleeping on me, and life is so sweet. And I'm just thinking about the future and I'm so excited. And then 30 minutes later, I cannot get this baby to go to sleep and it's crying and my head is shaking because of all the noise, and I haven't eaten near often enough. And I'm thinking like, this is the worst. Life will never get worse than this within 30 minutes. And so that, I think, is a reality for us to embrace, that as much as you can, just kind of roll with the punches. And when there's a high moment, soak up that high moment as much as you can. Those moments that just feel like life can get any better. Some of the sweetest moments you'll ever have is in this season of having a new baby, but some of the hardest moments you'll ever have, and they might be sandwiched right together in half an hour. And so learning to embrace that reality, I think, is a key part of the process. So Rachel, what do you think expectations look like? So if we're trying to help people think through how they set an expectation of how to embrace imperfections, what come to mind for you as like kind of key areas for that, or how you'd encourage people to embrace this season as it relates to imperfections?
Yeah, so the right expectations to me look like understanding fully 100% that you are a human being. And the expectation of that is that you will not be perfect. What that looks like to me is letting God be God and you just get to be you. And so when you put God on his throne and you say, okay, God is in control, God is the perfect one, he's got this, he's got ultimately the future of my child, he's got this day, he's got this hour, it takes the pressure off of you to be perfect. And you can just breathe this sigh of relief and walk with God in that way. And so I think that's, for me, like, the best way to set the right expectation is that I'm not going to get this perfect. And I know this may sound like very simple and like, duh, Rachel, it is not a simple concept for me on the inside. It is something that I constantly struggle with and constantly catch myself having incorrect expectations for myself and for my children. And so it's funny, one of the things that I talk about often is using your weaknesses for strength. So like letting your weaknesses become something strong about you. Like, I'm not a perfect mom. I have moments where I blow up and I lose my temper and I get really frustrated with my kids. And I decided as part of that, I'm going to be a mom that is really good at apologizing, that is really good at being super real with my kids and being really vulnerable with my kids and saying, oh my goodness, Wesley, I'm so sorry. Mommy should not have raised her voice like that. I love you. This is not because of you. This is because of something that I'm going through, and like reconciling and mending with my child. And he now is like so good at forgiving me. And like, it's just funny because now he's learning from my example of asking for forgiveness and apologizing. And he does that often. Like he will be throwing a tantrum or something, and we'll go through the whole rupture and repair process where, our bond is kind of there's stress on it, and then we repair it and we apologize and we hug it out. And he's just the sweetest thing. He says, oh, mommy, I sure do love you. I forgive you, mommy. And there's just nothing better. Like, what could be better that we express to our children than what it looks like to be human and to be dependent on God and to be humble and ask for forgiveness and receive grace and extend grace. And so I think if we just can have that mindset and that expectation set for, this is what I'm going to look like as a mom. I'm going to be a humble mom who is repentant and who serves her kids as best as she can and loves them as best as she can, is not going to get it all right, but God is, and he's going to fill the gap. And honestly, with that expectation, you just can't go wrong.
Yeah, that's so good. There's something so key in what you're saying. And I think you do a really good job of this, Rachel. And I don't think you're alone. That there's this sense of, I'm not doing enough. I'm not enough as a person, as a parent.
Right.
There's this gap between where we think we should be and where we are. And especially comparison tends to breed that. I think you do a great job of this principle of if there's a stress in the bond in your relationship with one of our kids, that you do a great job of apologizing. We need to apologize, asking them to apologize. And that can be such a process that breeds so much closeness. And that's what I want to say, I think, as we wrap up this idea of embracing imperfection, is that it's not perfection that breeds closeness with your kids, even as a baby. It's actually vulnerability. It's vulnerability in recognizing that you're just a human being that actually breeds closeness. And I think with a newborn, you can practice that.
Yeah.
I think if you can start saying those kinds of things to your baby and to your spouse and bringing vulnerability and authenticity into your home and setting aside comparison and the expectation of perfection and just being where you are and who you are and embracing that and celebrating that and just trying to do the best that you can every day. What an incredible environment to raise a child in, and starting that from day number one so that they never feel that they have to be perfect. They never feel like that's how they're going to be successful in life, but how they define success is by the closeness of relationship and their ability to be received and loved and cared for even in their imperfections. I think that's a really important principle that can start even with newborns. All right, so here we go. 2 pillars left. Pillar 3 is this idea of marital health with a new baby, making sure that you're prioritizing your relationship with your spouse in the midst of having this new baby. And there's a real problem here. I mean, getting to quality time together before kids is pretty easy, at least by comparison to what it's like when you have kids, where you're stretched so thin as a person and stretched so thin as a family. In reality, in that season of having a newborn, something has to give. I mean, you can't do all of the same things that you're used to. And unfortunately, something that I think we see is that too often it's marriage that people give if they have to give something.
Man, babe, that's so good. Just tell us, why do you think that is what people let go? And then why do you think it's so important that we don't do that?
Man, it's such a good question. What comes to mind for me when you say, why do we think people let it go, is I think we just think our marriage is going to be okay. You know, if we got married before we had kids, we've been married and that's been normal for us. And, you know, heading into the season of being kids, I feel like our marriage is probably okay. And what's new is having a new baby. And so I feel like if we're going to invest ourselves in something, that's where we need to put our time and our energy. And it really does require, I think, more at times than we even have to give. And so there's just this expectation that I think our marriage is going to be fine. But to your second question about why I think it's so important that we do invest in our marriage, even in the earliest season of having a baby, is if we're going to be real, we need to acknowledge that around half of marriages end in divorce. And that statistic is not that different inside of Christian households. And so if we're going to be real, we need to acknowledge that our marriage might not be fine. And no one expects when they get married that their marriage is going to end in divorce, but it happens for about half of people. And the only way to ensure that we're able to stay married is that we stay connected and that we invest in this relationship like we have to invest in any relationship. And then beyond that kind of heavy idea of making sure that, you know, we're actually able to stay married and the investment that requires, you know, in John 10:10, one of my favorite passages, scripture tells us that Jesus came so that we could have life and life abundant. And I think there's so much in scripture about how marriage is supposed to be this gift to us, and even this picture of Jesus and his church. And I just want to have an amazing life. And I know that to have an amazing life, it's such a gift to have an amazing, thriving marriage. And if our relationship is in a rough spot, which it has at times been a rough spot, I don't feel like my life is going that well because it's so critical and so important to me. And it's not enough to just kind of coexist in the same household. There's more that's available to us that's so critical to having an amazing experience of life every day. And so I think that's important for us, just even our own quality of life, to have a thriving marriage. And that's true when we have a newborn. And then the last thing I'd say is that I not only want to have a thriving relationship with you as my wife, but I want my kids to have that. I want our boys to have that. And how we treat each other and what our relationship looks like is going to be their normal. And so I want to show them what it looks like to, even though they don't necessarily like it when we go on date nights. And that was hard for our babies when they were babies and we left and they were with grandma. And there are some tough times there. Like, I like that from the very start, we've tried to invest in one another. And the times we haven't, we've learned how quickly things need an investment for us to re-up on our marriage. And I want our boys to have a picture of what's normal there that they can grow from.
Yeah, because it really just doesn't all fall into place. You know, you really have to work for it. You have to work for a healthy marriage, especially after a baby comes into the picture. And this is something we are going to spend at least one other podcast episode discussing. And we're going to cover topics like communication and maintaining connection, gender roles, family boundaries, like with your in-laws, with the people that want to come in and help you, how to date each other well. So yeah, we're just going to explore the different ways that you can fight for your marriage and how worth it will be to fight for it, and how you can set up rhythms for each other that work for you and your marriage specifically, that can carry you into the future. Okay, so that's 3 of the 4 pillars. The last one is a higher calling. This idea that parenting with God isn't just about surviving, but it is about thriving. That this is a calling from God. This is not, oh, you got knocked up. Excuse me. Yeah. It's not just that, though. Like, this is an amazing calling that God has hand-selected you for, to be this child's parent. And it's just really an amazing honor and gift. Craig, can you kind of open up about that? I know that you wrote a lot of that part of the workbook. Just kind of give us a little idea of your heart behind that, about parenting being a higher calling and God's call towards abundant life.
Yeah, so what comes to mind for me, we talk about a lot of this in First 15, which is the daily devotional that I write. That's a whole other brand, whole other platform. We'll talk about that in a second. But I think in Scripture, it's evident that God wants to example himself as what it actually is to be a perfect parent. And he set up the family system and rhythm for a reason. You know, to get a little crazy, God could have created our world any way that he wanted to. I mean, we could have popped out of eggs. We didn't have to have parents. We didn't have to have any of these things. God made it the way he did for a reason, and he was intentional behind that. And I think he has intention behind the family unit. And that intention, I think, is an eternal purpose. Yeah. And so it's not just about, as amazing as the family unit is here on earth, it's not just about having an amazing time as a family, and we do have an amazing time. At least I hope and believe and trust, but there's something higher to this. There's this example of a thriving heavenly unit, and how that is a picture of God's family, how it's a picture of his selflessness as a father, but also the fact that he disciplines us and loves us and calls us into those things that are most important, and can even tell us what's best and not best for us and for others. And there's this example that we're supposed to set for our kids of what it means for them to also have a heavenly parent, what it means for them to have their heavenly father. And I take that really seriously as a dad. I try to do my best as that. And it's often in my mind as I'm raising my kids, you know, what am I doing with them now that's going to help them understand who God is as a father? And what am I doing that's going to make it hard for them to understand that? All of us, and there's not an expectation of perfection there. We're not going to get that perfect. There's no way we can come close to parenting our kids the way that God would if he was us. And there's grace upon grace, and God's working in and through and around us and in our kids. And so hear all this from the lens of grace, but also there's an opportunity here. And I think especially in the newborn season, it's easy to just see it as really earthy. It's easy to just see it as something that's not necessarily super heavenly. You're not necessarily you're not having conversations with your baby. There's not these things we think of as hyper spiritual, but there's this opportunity to start from day one, loving your kid the way that you believe that God loves them and the way that God loves you. There's opportunity from the ground up to love your spouse that way, and to instill in your family that this family is going to be about something higher than just getting through day to day and just trying to thrive inside of this life alone, but that your family would actually point to the eternal life that we have in relationship with our Heavenly Father as well.
I love that. That is so good and so helpful, even for me now as a mom. So how could you give us some practicals for this? What does that look like just in parenting to actually do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is just really tough in those first few months. So for me, spending quality time alone with God in worship and reading and prayer literally absolutely transformed every part of my life. When I found that rhythm in college, has carried me through a lot of ups and downs and season transitions and changes. And so I'll just say, I think that's the most important thing. And with a newborn, it will not and cannot look like it did before if you had a time alone with God in any form or fashion before having kids, but you can still have one. Even in 15 minutes, something meaningful can take place to help you facilitate a connection with God that's real and tangible, to pray and ask for his help in those areas that you need help. And maybe the most important thing you could do for your family is bathe your family in prayer and bring it before God every day. But if you can connect to God and get a sense of that abiding connection with him on a daily basis, I think practically the most important thing you could do is spend quality time alone with God. So again, this is something a totally different brand, but since we're here, I'll just land the plane and say, if you're looking for a meaningful way to spend time alone with God, we do have a daily devotional that has worship and reading and prayer. There's a podcast, there's a free mobile app. We have it go out every day by email subscription. There's a website. As we're airing this podcast, there's over 1 million people that are using First 15, which still blows my mind as their resource for spending meaningful time alone with God. And so it's really easy if you're a new mom, if you're a new dad, you're waking up in the morning to even laying in bed to throw open your First 15 app, engage in worship and reading and prayer, and have this 15-minute time of connection with God on a daily basis.
I love that. And I'll just add just a quick plug. One of my favorite things is listening to the podcast. There's a First 15 daily podcast of Craig reading the devotional and doing this guided prayer. So moms up in the night nursing, you have like 30 minutes? Well, the First 15 podcast is only a few minutes, and you can put your AirPods in and just sit in the dark and nurse your baby and connect with God, even in the middle of the night. And those are some of the sweetest moments, just to take advantage of those nighttime feedings even.
Well, all right, that's the 4 pillars of how Rachel and I see thriving as Christian parents with a newborn.
And that is episode 1 in the books. So excited that you've chosen to join us, and we are humbled and pumped to help you make the most of this crazy and incredibly life-giving and beautiful season of having a new baby.
For the rest of the episodes in this podcast season, we're going to dive into really specific topics. So today was really an overview of our workbook. Again, if you want to check out our workbook, you can go to christianparenting.org to find a parent's guide to new baby. As far as action steps for you for today, would really encourage you to go and get that book. Second, subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. And even with episode 1, if you want to rate and review it, that goes a long way to help other parents that are searching for Christian parenting content find this podcast. We want to help and resource as many people as possible. And then if you have friends that are pregnant, or that have a new baby, or are planning on having a baby and you think they'd like this content, feel free to share it with your friends. You can do that on social media, or you can just tell them to check for So You're Having a Baby podcast wherever they listen to their podcasts. We know that parenting a newborn is real hard, but know that we are here to help. Thanks again for listening, and have an amazing rest of your day.